Imagine waking up tomorrow and discovering that humanity has forgotten how to build a computer. Not that every computer has been destroyed, not that civilization has collapsed. The computers are still here, but nobody remembers how to make a new one. The engineers are gone. The knowledge has disappeared. At first, that sounds impossible. How could an entire civilization forget something so important? Yet, history suggests a far more uncomfortable truth. It has happened before, again and again. A legendary steel that nobody could reproduce. A weapon that helped save an empire, then vanished forever. A concrete formula that survived longer than many modern buildings. A machine so advanced, it appeared more than 1,000 years before its time. For years, people reached for extraordinary explanations. Lost super-civilizations, ancient aliens. But the truth is far more fascinating. None of these technologies were built by gods. None required magic. They were created by ordinary people. Human hands, human minds. What disappeared was not the technology. What disappeared was the chain. The chain connecting one generation to the next. A teacher to an apprentice. A parent to a child. And once that chain breaks, entire worlds of knowledge can vanish. Before we begin, keep one question in mind. If our civilization suffered one truly terrible century, what technology would disappear first? By the end of this video, that question may feel a lot more personal than it does right now. We often imagine that knowledge lives in books, in libraries. But most knowledge actually lives inside people. A master glassmaker teaching an apprentice. A surgeon feeling something no textbook can fully describe. Knowledge is not just information. Knowledge is experience. And experience is fragile. Imagine a village with one person who knows how to make a certain tool. Everyone depends on it. But only one person knows how to make it. Then that person dies. The village still owns the tool. People can touch it, copy its shape. Yet nobody can create another one. The object survives. The knowledge does not. This pattern appears repeatedly throughout history. A skill becomes common. Then the chain weakens. A war destroys workshops. An empire falls. And slowly, something disappears. Not because humanity became less intelligent, but because knowledge stopped moving. History is filled with examples. Technologies that seemed permanent, then one day, they were gone. Future generations looked at the surviving objects and asked, how did they do that? The answer was always, people. And nowhere is that lesson clearer than in the story of Damascus steel. The first technology on our list was not lost because the craftsmen forgot. It was lost because the world changed around them, and they never realized it. Imagine spending 30 years mastering a craft. You begin as a teenager, watching masters work. You learn to judge heat by color. Eventually, you become a master yourself. Then you teach someone else, and the chain continues. For centuries, Damascus steel was among the most admired materials on Earth. Its surface carried flowing patterns resembling moving water. Travelers described it. Some claimed the blades could slice silk in mid-air. Damascus steel became legendary. Yet the story begins far from Damascus itself. The material originated from a special crucible steel known as woots, produced primarily in parts of India and Sri Lanka. The steel traveled west through trade networks. There, skilled smiths transformed it into blades famous throughout the world. The process worked for centuries. Then, something strange happened. The workshops remained. The blacksmiths remained. But the results changed. By the 18th century, the famous Damascus patterns had largely disappeared. Imagine being one of those craftsmen. You follow the same procedures as your father. You use the same furnace. Yet the blade refuses to become what it once was. But the magic is gone. For nearly 200 years, nobody understood why. Then, modern science entered the story. Researchers examined surviving Damascus blades under powerful microscopes. What they discovered changed everything. Tiny structures hidden within the metal, complex carbon formations. The craftsmen never knew these structures existed. And then, researchers uncovered an even bigger clue. The secret wasn't entirely in the workshop. Part of the secret lived inside the ore itself. Trace elements. When trade networks changed and ore sources shifted, the outcome changed too. The craftsmen believed they were repeating the same recipe, but one ingredient had quietly disappeared, and because nobody knew it mattered, nobody knew it was gone. The chain broke, because the world changed in a way they could not see. Sometimes, the most important part of a technology is the part nobody realizes matters. Which brings us to a Roman artifact so strange that for centuries, nobody understood how it worked. A simple drinking cup, and perhaps the world's first accidental nanotechnology. In the British Museum sits a cup that shouldn't work, at least not according to what most people imagine ancient technology looked like. From a distance, it seems ordinary, but not revolutionary. Then the light changes, and suddenly the impossible happens. The cup turns red. The glass itself appears to transform. Green becomes crimson. The object seems alive. For centuries, nobody understood why. Yet nobody could fully explain it. Then modern scientists looked closer. Inside the glass, they discovered tiny particles of gold and silver, not visible to the naked eye. Particles measured in billionths of a meter. Today we call effects like this nanotechnology. The Romans had no such word, yet somehow they created the effect anyway. A Roman artisan, working nearly 2,000 years ago, accidentally produced something modern science would not fully understand until centuries later. How? The answer is both simple and profound. Practice. Generations of accumulated experience. Someone discovered that combining materials in a particular way produced extraordinary results. Then that knowledge passed from teacher to student, until one day it stopped. The cup survived. The knowledge did not. But the next story reveals something even more important, because sometimes ancient technology looks impossible only because we're asking the wrong question. Few claims appear more often online than this. The Egyptians could not have cut granite. The argument sounds convincing. Granite is extremely hard. Copper is relatively soft. The Egyptians used copper tools. Therefore, the Egyptians could not have done it. Simple. Wrong. The mistake comes from assuming copper performed the cutting. It didn't. Imagine trying to smooth a piece of wood with sandpaper. Is the paper doing the cutting? No. The abrasive particles are. Ancient Egyptian stoneworking followed the same principle. Workers used copper saws and copper drilling tubes, but the real work was performed by abrasive materials such as quartz sand. The sand ground against the granite. The copper simply held everything in place. Slowly, grain by grain, stone yielded. This sounds less exciting than lost super technology, but it is actually far more impressive, because it reminds us what organized human effort can accomplish. Imagine standing beside a granite block in ancient Egypt. The sun is relentless, hour after hour, day after day. Yet eventually the stone gives way, not because of a miracle, but because thousands of workers refused to quit. We underestimate patience. We underestimate time. Ancient people achieved extraordinary things not because they possessed impossible technology, but because they possessed extraordinary determination. Because the next technology wasn't lost through accident. It was lost because people deliberately tried to keep it secret, and that decision may have doomed it forever. Imagine holding a weapon capable of changing history, a weapon powerful enough to help save an empire. Now imagine making a choice. Never write down the complete formula. Never allow outsiders to learn it. For centuries, the Byzantine Empire possessed exactly such a weapon: Greek fire. Even today, the name carries an almost mythical quality. Historical accounts describe a burning substance projected through bronze siphons, a weapon capable of terrifying enemy fleets, a weapon that helped defend Constantinople during some of the empire's darkest moments. The exact formula remains unknown. Historians have theories: petroleum products, quicklime, sulfur, but nobody knows the complete recipe. Yet the real lesson isn't about chemistry, it's about secrecy. Knowledge is power, and power leaks. The more people who know a secret, the harder it becomes to control. So they restricted access. Only a small number of people understood the process. The chain became shorter. At first, that strategy worked brilliantly. Then history intervened. Political instability, wars, economic decline, and suddenly the chain became too fragile. The secret survived generations, then failed, almost overnight. Imagine being one of the final keepers of Greek fire. Perhaps you never imagined you were the last link. But every lost technology has a last link. Then the chain ended. Greek fire wasn't lost because people forgot to record it. Greek fire was lost because they chose not to. And that may be the most dangerous lesson in this entire video. Because knowledge hidden too well can disappear just as easily as knowledge never recorded at all. Sometimes humanity stares directly at the answer for centuries and still fails to recognize what it's seeing. Walk into the Pantheon in Rome. Look up. Above your head hangs one of the greatest engineering achievements in human history. A massive concrete dome, built nearly 2,000 years ago, still standing. Empires have risen beneath it. Empires have fallen beneath it. The dome remains. Now compare that to many modern structures. Bridges require repairs. Concrete deteriorates. Entire buildings sometimes need major restoration within decades. How did the Romans create concrete capable of surviving for millennia? For years, researchers believed they understood the answer: volcanic ash. The Romans mixed volcanic materials into their concrete. That explanation was correct, but it wasn't complete, because another clue had been hiding in plain sight. Tiny white fragments scattered throughout Roman concrete. For decades, many experts dismissed them as mistakes. Then researchers looked closer. The fragments weren't mistakes, they were part of the design. When cracks formed and water entered the concrete, chemical reactions could occur. Minerals recrystallized. Small cracks partially healed themselves. 2,000 years ago, builders may have accidentally created a material capable of repairing itself, not through computers, through chemistry. The Romans probably didn't understand the science behind it. They understood the process. The process was enough, until the chain broke. The empire fragmented. The concrete survived. The knowledge did not. For more than 1,000 years, humanity could look directly at Roman concrete without understanding why it worked. The final technology on our list is even more unbelievable, because it doesn't look ancient at all. It looks like something from the future. In 1901, sponge divers discovered a shipwreck near the Greek island of Antikythera. Among the wreckage were several heavily corroded lumps of bronze. Nothing about them seemed remarkable, at first. They sat quietly in museum collections, ignored. Then technology caught up. Researchers used X-rays to examine the fragments. What they discovered stunned the world. Inside the corroded bronze were gears, lots of gears, interlocking gears, the kind of mechanisms nobody expected to find in the ancient world. As the pieces were reconstructed, the truth became increasingly astonishing. The device could track astronomical cycles, predict eclipses, calculate celestial events. In practical terms, it was an analog computer, built more than 2,000 years ago. Pause for a moment. At a time when much of the world was still organized around kingdoms, agriculture, and trade, someone had built a machine capable of calculating the heavens. Someone had imagined translating the movement of the sky into bronze gears. And then the chain broke. Imagine the workshop where it was built, the sound of tools, a master craftsman teaching an apprentice, explaining gear ratios. Now imagine that workshop disappearing. The master dies. The apprentice never teaches another generation. The knowledge narrows, then vanishes. The machine survives. The tradition does not. That is what makes the Antikythera mechanism so haunting. Not merely that it existed, but that humanity forgot such a thing was possible. The machine sat at the bottom of the sea, waiting, until the modern world finally rediscovered it. Progress is not always a straight line. Sometimes humanity moves forward. Sometimes humanity forgets. Now look back at all 6 technologies: Damascus steel, the Lycurgus cup, Egyptian stoneworking, Greek fire, Roman concrete, the Antikythera mechanism. At first glance, they seem unrelated, different cultures, different centuries, yet every one of them tells the same story. Not a story about mysterious technology, a story about fragile knowledge. A steel whose secret depended on materials nobody fully understood. A Roman cup whose beauty relied on particles too small to see. A stone-cutting method hidden inside ordinary sand. A weapon protected so carefully it vanished. A concrete formula disguised as a mistake. A machine centuries ahead of its time. Different inventions, the same lesson. Knowledge survives only when people carry it forward. That is the real meaning of lost technology. Not aliens, not magic. A broken chain. The teacher disappears. The student never learns. The knowledge stops moving. And suddenly something that once seemed ordinary becomes impossible. Think about the people behind these technologies. The blacksmith who forged Damascus steel. The Roman glassmaker experimenting with molten materials. The Egyptian stoneworker standing beneath the desert sun. The Byzantine engineer guarding a dangerous secret. The Roman builder mixing concrete. The Greek craftsman cutting tiny gears by hand. None of them knew they were creating mysteries. None of them knew future generations would stare at their work and wonder how it was done. To them, these skills were ordinary. What disappeared wasn't intelligence. What disappeared was continuity, the chain. And perhaps that is the most important lesson history can teach us. Civilizations do not lose knowledge because people become stupid. They lose knowledge because knowledge is fragile. Every generation inherits a library built by those who came before. And every generation has a responsibility to learn, to teach, to pass it forward. Because once a chain breaks, rebuilding it can take centuries. Which leaves us with one final question. If our civilization suffered one truly terrible century, which technology would disappear first? Tell me in the comments. I'd love to hear your answer. Because the real story of history isn't what humanity created. It's what humanity almost forgot. And sometimes, The truth is far more impressive than the myth. Until next time, keep digging.